Hello, Andrew Larson's Film Review channel is here with another film review. The movies are BlackBerry, Hypnotic, and Fool's Paradise. Two of these movies stars from the FX television series It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which has been on TV for about 50 years, one of the longest running television series of all time. First review, I'll be reviewing BlackBerry, which is a Canadian drama. This movie stars Canadian actors Jay Baruchel and Glenn Howerton, the latter of whom is one of the aforementioned stars from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And they play two real-life guys that have something to do with a cell phone. And this is another brand movie, like 2023's earlier Air and Tetris. But this is not like a sponsored brand movie. This is like a movie that is based on a book, and the story just so happens to be about a brand, like The Social Network. So this is not a commercial movie. This is an art film, and this is a real piece of art, and it's a pretty great movie. It definitely has more in common with The Social Network than it does with Air or Tetris. Sometimes it feels like it has a little bit too much in common with The Social Network, but I think at the end of the day, it's its own film. It's more human than the very cold Social Network, and it's pretty profound and deep. Great story. I watched it twice. It's 2 hours long. Each time went by in a snap of the fingers. Spoiler review. So this movie is about the origins of the BlackBerry phone, and BlackBerry is like the catalyst for the smartphone. It's like the first smartphone. I don't know if anyone remembers it. It was like a little thing, and it was had a keyboard. This is what phones used to look like back in the day, and this was a progressive phone for the time, but it ended up getting outmoded in a span of only a handful of years. And that's what this movie's about. It's about how the BlackBerry came into existence. A group of men willed it into existence with all of their might, and a few years later it was outmoded, because that's just how the world works. The futility of all things. There's no point in progress. Everyone gets buried in the avalanche of humanity and human history. A profound, deep film, great performances, great aesthetics, a good soundtrack, some great needle drops that are a lot of music from the time this film is supposed to take place, which is in the mid-2000s. Great use of music, great editing style. Just everything about this movie really worked for me. The only problems I had with this movie were very small nitpicks. As I said, it's very reminiscent of The Social Network, which is not one of my favorite movies, and I do like this one more. I do think the director was certainly inspired by The Social Network, and I think he was trying to make something like that in his head, but I think this is more effective. As I said, it's more human, definitely more emotions in this film. Doesn't feel like it was made by a robot. The Social Network was a movie that was about a robot, Mark Zuckerberg, and it felt like it was made by a robot, and that worked for that movie. But this is a more human movie. There's also a scene where the characters say they're going to watch Letterboxd version of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it cuts to them just watching a full-screen version of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Why? In addition to those two small flaws, there are some moments when the drama, the dramatic elements of the film feel a little forced. Not in the same way as in Air or Tetris, where the whole thing felt contrived and forced in a way that was supposed to make the brand look cooler, better, more interesting, but just in a way where it's like maybe trying to spoon feed you how to feel about what the characters are going through. It just feels a little heavy-handed. The next movie that I'll be reviewing is Hypnotic, and this is the new movie from a guy who makes tacos, Robert Rodriguez. Spoiler-free review. So this movie is like a remake of Firestarter, Stephen King's Firestarter, another remake of that, but with elements of Minority Report and Vanilla Sky shoved in. And that makes this movie sound way more interesting than it is, because this movie is very not interesting. It's very boring. It's very generic, almost hypnotically generic. I would never have guessed that Robert Rodriguez made this movie if I didn't know going in. It feels like this movie was made by a brand new director, a television director, someone just making a direct-to-video movie and they don't care about it at all. There's no spark, there's no touch, Feels like Robert Rodriguez just trying to go into a completely different and more serious mode and just failing completely. I like most of the movies I've seen from the man, and I like some of his movies quite a bit. Before this, The Faculty would have been the worst I've seen. I really don't like that movie. I don't think he put a lot of passion into that movie. I think that's a very passionless commercial effort from the Weinsteins. I think this movie is either as bad as The Faculty or just on that same level, maybe a little bit worse. This is a pretty poor movie. Horrible performance from Ben Affleck, horrible performances from everybody, horrible direction, horrible story, horrible writing, horrible editing. Spoiler review. So this movie's about Ben Affleck, and it starts off where he's a detective. He has a daughter that got kidnapped, and he gets involved in this scheme involving people that are known as hypnotics. And hypnotics aren't psychics, they're different because they can use their psychic powers to influence other people to do things. Pretty crazy. So these hypnotics can be like, you should pee your pants, and then you'll pee your pants. But Ben Affleck isn't affected by the hypnotics because he's got a magical mental block. And so the movie just goes on like a normal procedural where it's Ben Affleck as a cop and he's trying to get to the bottom of this hypnotic conspiracy. And then there's like a paradigm shift at the end of the movie where it turns out that his daughter didn't actually get kidnapped. He's in a hypnotic simulation where the hypnotic mastermind is trying to figure out where Ben Affleck hid his daughter. Because Ben Affleck's daughter is like the hypnotic chosen one, because she's the daughter of two psychics. And this is the first time anyone's ever been a child of two psychics. This is a grand experiment, and she's the chosen one psychic. So then Ben Affleck and his daughter lure all the hypnotics out to a field or a barn or something, and they shoot them all to death. And if you even followed what I just said, if you haven't seen that movie and you were able to follow the plot that I just described to you, good for you. But you aren't going to enjoy it anymore watching this movie. This is definitely like a contender for the most generic thing I've ever seen. It's just there's nothing in this movie that's original. A lot of it's taken from early 2000s movies like Minority Report and Vanilla Sky. And even more of it is taken just straight from Firestarter, which isn't that original of a story. Firestarter is just the basic story of the MKUltra program and human experiments to create human weapons. Nothing interesting or new is done with it here in this Robert Rodriguez movie. In the last movie I'll be reviewing, this is the other movie starring an Always Sunny in Philadelphia veteran. This time it's Charlie Day. Of the Always Sunny in Philadelphia cast members, Charlie Day is certainly the one that has had the most success, not only outside of the show, but in Hollywood on the big screen. He's been in plenty of things. He was just in Mario. He was in Monsters University. And he's also had some small roles in actual movies, I forget. And not only is he starring in this movie, Fool's Paradise, but he also wrote and directed it. So he's like an auteur, and this is his vision. And what a sad, pathetic vision it is, because, wow. This is another very generic and underwhelming movie. It's better than Hypnotic, but not by much. Spoiler-free review. So if you look at it, and you look at the trailer, you look at the poster, you're like, this is kind of like a Coen Brothers kind of thing. Like it's supposed to be like a Coen Brothers kind of movie. And there's a little bit of that. The movie that this is most like is the classic comedy, Being There with Peter Sellers, which is a fantastic movie about a stupid guy. And he just kind of wanders through life. And because he's so stupid, he just ends up becoming the most powerful man in the world. You could say this is a rip-off of Being There. You could say it's an homage to Being There. But this movie does not have the profound meaning that Being There has. This movie doesn't work in the way that Being There does. It's a completely different intention. It has the basic frame of Being There, but it's more of a Shaggy Dog story. And this is where the Coen Brothers comparisons become more pertinent. It's like Being There mixed with The Big Lebowski, but with a little bit of like Robert Altman's The Player thrown in, because it's a showbiz comedy. And wow, it really doesn't have a whole lot to offer in any sense. Being There, The Big Lebowski, these are movies that are fantastic, deep movies. This movie has nothing to say. and it essentially has nothing to do. It's just an ambling mess. It feels like it was written on the fly, strewn together. You can see the obvious influences that it's proudly wearing, but it has nothing to offer of its own, similar to Hypnotic. I did get a few laughs out of it, a few, but as the movie went on, I started laughing less and less, and I started getting more and more annoyed. Spoiler review: this movie is about a mentally ill person. Charlie Day's main character gets spotted off the street because he happens to look exactly like an actor who this producer is having some trouble with. So he brings Charlie Day in, and Charlie Day becomes the next big thing. And it's sort of like being there in that respect, because this person is having all this success occur even though he's not doing anything, and because he's not doing anything. But it's not very well explored, and a lot of the comedic potential is just falls flat to the ground. It's like it feels like Charlie Day didn't want to make this, which is confusing because he wrote and directed and starred in it. It just feels like there isn't any inspiration. So this goes on, this showbiz satire about how you don't have to be smart to make it in Hollywood, you just have to do what everyone says. He stars in one movie and he becomes like a big success, but then he stars in another movie and he's not a big success anymore. So it's like satire about how Hollywood eats its own. And then there's a small section that goes nowhere where the character is gets into politics. And it's politics are just like entertainment, you just act here too. So deep and so satirical. And all this goes absolutely nowhere. It doesn't even end. The movie changes, and it turns into a bromance between Charlie Day's character and this publicist who is taking him on, played by Ken Jeong. This publicist is an abusive, manipulative character, but for some reason it turns into a bromance between them, and that's how the movie ends. So it's it starts out as a showbiz satire, goes nowhere, turns into a bromance that makes no sense, and then ends. I watched this movie in a theater with, I think, 4 other people in it, and I was the only one left at the end of the movie. The rest of them walked out of this movie, and they walked out very close to the end. I assumed that they had just given up, because they were so lost, they didn't know where the movie was going, they were bored, there were no laughs. And it just seemed like the movie was way longer than it was, and it seemed obviously like it was not going to go anywhere, and it never did. I'm envious of the people that walked out of this movie, but still, I can't say this is the worst movie. It didn't piss me off so much. Just very underwhelming and generic, just like Hypnotic, except not quite as bad as Hypnotic, because it did have a couple of laughs.